Hi, I'm Loris Alexander. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says Trudeau was too slow in finding COVID-19 vaccines. New York City is planning on reopening schools even as virus cases spike. And a horrible break-in at Honker's Pub and Eatery this Sunday morning, causing extensive damage.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thank you for joining us. We begin with horrible news of a break-in at a favorite local pub. Honker's Pub and Eatery was broken into early Sunday morning. A truck plowed through the front windows of the restaurant, smashing glass and causing severe damage to the property. The driver also made off with some stolen items. The owner said that thankfully nobody was injured. Footage was caught on security cameras, and Lethbridge police are currently investigating. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole accused the Liberal government of putting too much emphasis on partnering with a Chinese company for a COVID-19 vaccine in what turned out to be a failed deal between the National Research Council and Chinese vaccine maker CanSino.
It looks like we're going to be months behind our allies on vaccines. These are critical tools. The vaccine is the hope we were all looking for. And I think Canadians are going to be rightly frustrated when we see many other countries, both G7 countries like ours, but also countries, less advanced from a manufacturing capacity, from a life sciences capacity, rolling out millions of doses before Canada. I hate to see us trailing. I don't compare ourselves to the worst response. I want Canada's response to be the best. That's why I want to see a plan, and I want to see a plan for the economy. We need to get people working. There can't be a full economy, a growing economy, people working, people being productive, without the tools to keep that happening in a pandemic. Those two tools are rapid tests and a vaccine. And so with part of our economy in lockdown at the moment, parts of it, and these are why Canadians are frustrated about the potential for more lockdowns, where we can have tools that can limit the impact on our economy.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced that they will reopen their school system to in-person learning the week of Monday, December 7th, and increase the number of days a week many children attend class. This decision comes even as the coronavirus pandemic intensifies in the city.
Any school that does have the space and the ability to move to 5-day-a-week in-person instruction for those kids, that will now be the preferred model. So we'll have in-person instruction for those who are part of that approach, remote for all other kids. All K-5 programs, whether they're standalone or part of a bigger school, those grades will come back, and those pre-K, 3K centers. Why? Because we know, first of all, studies consistently show that younger kids are having less of a negative experience, and there's less concern about the spread when it comes to younger kids. Also, the demands that our parents are going through, and I feel for all our parents who are experiencing so many challenges right now, how important it is for them to have their younger kids in school, how important it is at that age, both educationally and socially, but also in terms of how parents juggle all the challenges in their life.
The province is bringing in a wide array of new public health measures as coronavirus cases rise in Alberta. For schools, the new measures mean junior high and high school students will move to at-home learning beginning November 30th.
Grades 7 to 12, starting this coming Monday, November 30th, are no longer in school. And so learning will occur at home. For some of our schools, it will take Monday, November 30th to do some transition time, to make sure that they've got their families connected on technology, that they have, if there's reassignments of teachers to different things, because the scheduling looks a little bit different, then those parents will know from school communication if their classes will be starting on Monday, November 30th, or Tuesday, December 1st, right? Because for some of our schools, it does mean some logistics and reassignment and just making sure all of our students have navigated the technology piece.
Once they return from holiday break, students will continue to be required to learn at home until January 8th. Some of Kenney's imposed new sweeping public health restrictions included sharply curtailed attendance at weddings and funerals. He said the goal is to slash the rate of infections and keep people alive while preventing the loss of jobs and livelihoods that threaten to make an already dire situation even worse.
So the biggest and most obvious restriction is the fact that Cornerstone can only now have 10 people per service. That does include friends, family, minister, musicians, really anybody that's there invited by the family. The fortunate part is the fact that Cornerstone is not included in those numbers, so the funeral home can be above and beyond those 10 people, so our staff doesn't count. So still, though, many families, even immediate families, are looking at 10 people plus, and so it's hard for families to gather together during this time and hopefully share that time together. But a lot of things that have come about from that, things like our live streaming capabilities, etc., at least bring people together that can't be together physically.
Well, you may have heard of this well-known elementary school principal in Lethbridge who, despite battling cancer, is inspiring the entire community.
About 5, I headed over to the kids' bathroom and was going to shower, and that's the last thing I remember.
Higginson was found unconscious on the bathroom floor by his dad and his aunt. He was airlifted to Foothills Hospital in Calgary.
They said it's going to look like BROC, but he's going to have a tube down his throat. And true enough, he's as handsome as ever, nice and tan from a good weekend.
Yeah, the weekend before I had been working at the lake, so I was outside lots and I had a good tan. So
yeah, he looked handsome as ever. He was sleeping and he had a tube down his throat. And I was able to come in right away and hold his hand. And, obviously it could have been worse. They might have not found him on time, but they did.
A lot of tough conversations were had, conversations no family should have to go through.
I'm of that mindset, like when I asked for a hand in marriage, I said to her dad, like, I promise I'll take care of her for the rest of my life. Like, that's what you're gonna do. And so you're going with the apology mode that, I'm sorry that there's a possibility that I'm not gonna be the one that's gonna be able to do that, right?
Despite the tough journey, Stephanie and Brock are fighting the good fight, inspiring people along the way.
He's given me the opportunity to grow and learn during this process. And sorry.
Don't apologize.
I'm not apologizing to you. Like I said, he's given me this opportunity to grow. And at the beginning, when I found out that he had cancer, I can't lose him. He's my whole world. But I know he'll do it. And the reason I know that is because he tells me every day. He tells me every day he's going to do it. And he's going to fight it. And if there is one man out here that has a purpose of living, it's Brock.
Recapping one of our top news stories, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole accused the Liberal government of putting too much emphasis on partnering with a Chinese company for a COVID-19 vaccine in what turned out to be a failed deal between the National Research Council and Chinese vaccine maker CanSino. And taking a look at weekend weather, another cool, windy weekend comes to a close in our city. Overnight, expect clear skies and a low of -2 degrees Celsius. On Monday, we should have a mix of sun and cloud and a high of 5 degrees. After the break, catch our interview with Carrie Oberbrunner, author of Unhackable, Close the Gap Between Dreaming and Doing.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Christmas at Casa Holiday Market is going online this year from now until December 1st at christmasatcasa.ca. Avoid the crowds and find one-of-a-kind art pieces and fine crafts handmade by over 40 vendors. Depending on the vendor, there are various options for local drop-off, shipping, and safe curbside pickup. Visit christmasatcasa.ca today. Shop of Wonders is looking for volunteers beginning in December to help bring some Christmas cheer to families who need a special something this year. This is a My City Care initiative through My Victory Church in Lethbridge, which helps to give people hope and a hand up. Volunteers will wrap gifts, entertain kids, and assist with other tasks. To learn more about this opportunity, call Carol at 403-942-1378 or email carol@myvictory.ca. Get to know your city and take part in the Lethbridge Scavenger Hunt. Download the Let's Roam Scavenger Hunt app, lace up your walking shoes, and head out with family to discover the best landmarks in Lethbridge. Put your navigation skills to the test while enjoying the journey at your own pace. No reservations, no tour guides, and fun for all ages. Visit letsroam.com/scavenger hunt. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
COVID-19 has thrown many lives into disorder, disrupting our normal and getting us off track. But is there a secret to getting back on track and fulfilling the dreams and goals that we have in life? Today's guest is CHERYL Oberbrunner, who is a life coach and CEO of Lighting Souls and author of Unhackable: Close the Gap Between Dreaming and Doing, available at CHERYLOberbrunner.com. CHERYL joins me today via Skype from Columbus, Ohio. CHERYL, hello. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Jeanette.
All right. So, CHERYL, can you give us a brief overview of what your book is about?
Yeah, so nobody woke up on January 1st saying a pandemic is going to happen, or politics, at least here in the U.S., are going to be so traumatic. But the reality is that we woke up to 2020 thinking everything would be normal, but in a real way, we got hacked. And when people hear the word hack, they often think about a bank account or their phone. But the word hacked means when someone or something gains unauthorized access to a system or a computer. And when we think about our own bodies, they're made up of systems, circulatory, respiratory, and our brains are like supercomputers. So in a real way, we woke up thinking everything was going to be cool, but then life hacked us. And there's a cost to being hacked mentally.
Okay, so we know basically what happens when our computer gets hacked, right? But what exactly is a hack on our lives? Can you maybe give us some examples?
Yes. So most people wake up and they think, you know what, I have so many cool things I'm going to do today, even if they're quarantined. You know, they think I have a plan. But the reality is that we touch our phones with taps, swipes, or clicks 2,600 times a day, which is crazy. We have an average of 5,000 ads pass before our eyes. We have to make 35,000 decisions every single day. In fact, about food, it's 226. So we're in this world right now where there's so much information coming at us that instead of responding to our day, we essentially react to our day. Most people within the first 10 minutes, and guilty, you know, we're checking our phones. Well, what happens when you check your phone? It's everyone else's agenda for your life. And apps come with preloaded notifications. We have wearables today. I get it. I mean, technology is a tool we're supposed to use, but now technology is using us.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? So CHERYL, how can we protect ourselves from these so-called hacks?
Well, until we get what's called our boon, and it's just a fancy word to say your big dream, but until we understand what our dream is in life, we actually don't care if we get hacked. It's kind of like saying, well, you know what, this is just the way it is, and this is how things are. But once you have a dream, then you suddenly say that dream is worth more than binging on Netflix or, you know, going to the latest games and always being full with meetings. So the point is that nobody wakes up and says, I want to have a hacked life. But instead, at the end of the day, we often say things like, I'm burnt out, I'm running on fumes, I'm going on empty, I feel fried. You know, we use all these terms that explain our energy level and how it really is finite and limited. But the reality is that we just think we can take on more and more. And part of the problem, Jeanette, is that human knowledge used to double every 1,000 years. So like you think about that in the years past, today we absorb more information than the average person used to do in their entire lifetime, we do in one day. So you can imagine like teens, young people especially, but everybody, we have so much coming at us right now. We no longer can navigate above the noise. So I give little tips. In fact, I call them focus filters. There's 3 of them. One is urgency, another one is agency, and then the third is energy. So let's talk about urgency first. We know that in America, with the medical world, we can just go into the doctor and we can wait in the waiting room and this type of thing. But if we go to something called urgent care here in the US, it costs more, but all of a sudden we get better service because there's a cost involved. Like if you don't get this person on some machines quick, there's going to be a penalty. There's going to be a death maybe. So urgency in life always amplifies up our attention. And that's what we're in right now, the attention economy that's measured with eyeballs and eardrums. And people, marketers especially, want us to pay attention. In other words, there's a cost. Before they pay with sales, we pay attention. So Jeanette, what I encourage people to do is that first focus filter is to put a deadline with their dreams. Don't say, you know, someday I'm going to write a book. Someday I'm going to start a business. Bring that thing back and say, February 5th, 2021, I'm going to create a business plan. And now all of a sudden that you have a deadline, you don't get hacked as much because you say, that deadline is keeping me on track. But most of us, we don't have deadlines in life.
Now, a lot of people have been, hacked by the COVID pandemic, losing jobs or having hours reduced. So what's your advice on how to get a proper perspective on all of this?
Yeah, I think the number one thing you do is you need to guard your mind. We wake up in one of 2 ways. We wake up with what's called a victim mindset or a victor mindset. A victim mindset, which again, we're all guilty of, but it says the world happens to me. So this is where we wake up and we say, what did Trump say? What did Biden say? What does the economy say? Like we literally say the world's happening to me. And when you have a victim mindset, you actually feel powerless because you say, I can't control COVID. I can't control this. I can't control that. Well, a victor, and by the way, victims, remember it like this. They lie in bed, blame, excuses, and denial, BED. Blame, excuses, and denial. And I've been guilty. But a victor says, I happen to the world. And it doesn't mean you're God or something, but it means I happen to my day. I happen to my smartphone. I happen to my family. Like it brings back a control and a power to the average person, which feels so powerless. And the way that you remember a victor is oar, like an oar. Like you put your oar in the water and move forward. Ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And so every day we can either lie in blame, excuses, and denial, or ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And it could be the small things. It could be like, you know what, kids? We're going to actually go out and do a walk at the park. Like that's much better than saying, well, let's just sit here and watch Twitter and see what's blowing up. Because again, we are now creators instead of consumers.
Wow. Now, Carey, I know that setting goals and making plans is a big part of what you teach. So what kinds of goals and plans would you recommend to someone who's, say, lost their job?
Yeah, I think sometimes we shoot too high. And I'm really big into celebrating the small wins. Because if you look at a journey, let's just say you're looking at a mountain and you say, oh my gosh, that would take forever to get up there. Of course, you're going to be overwhelmed. That's like getting the new job. Oh my gosh, I have to go get a resume. I have to get my hair done. If you have hair, I don't have it. So that puts me advantage. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's this big task. So instead, you break it down into smaller goals, micro goals, we call this. And what happens is you start then celebrating the micro goals. Like, I'm going to open up a Word document. Like, as dumb as that sounds, that's a win. And then I'm going to put my name, I'm going to put my experience, you just start laying it out. I'm going to contact a few people and you start celebrating. And here's what happens. The word enthusiasm, you start feeling it again. And enthusiasm is infectious. You know when someone's enthusiastic. The cool thing about that word is it means theos, God, God within, possessed by God. And so literally you can tell when someone's amped, excited, when it's authentic. And that's something that actually does get you hired, not someone who's sitting there saying, how much time do I get off? And what are the benefits? That's very self-focused. You want to be other-centric.
Interesting. Okay, so most of us have some sort of dream, right? So things that we'd like to achieve in life, but a lot of us may not be so sure if these desires are actually part of our destiny or if they're just a pipe dream. So any advice on how to know what God's will is for our life?
That's a great question. I used to have this approach that said, I'm not taking action unless God shows me. And it sounds spiritual, but it's actually very selfish. It's like the parable of the talent. When God gives out 5, 2, and 1, the guy with 1's basically like, hey, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to bury it because I'm afraid. What I like is a default for action. Because there's a verse that says, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. There's 2 ways to view that verse. One way is if I get tight with God, I'm going to get a Lamborghini. Okay, that's not the right view. The right view is if I get tight with God, the desires that I have in my heart are going to be God-given. It's like a husband says to a wife, you don't have to guess what the partner wants because you're hanging with them, you're spending time with them, that pretty soon you know what they want. And so I just want to encourage people, if you don't know what God's will for your life is, delight yourself in him and then trust that the desires in your heart are God-given and have that default be action. And if God wants to stop you, he will. It's very different. I think the other way is just living a life of victimhood again, where God's got to show me, I don't want to fail. And in scripture, it says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. We must have faith. And faith is taking action when you can't see all the results.
Interesting. So when it comes to pursuing a dream, lots of us get excited and initially motivated, but then we get discouraged or distracted or we procrastinate. Of course, I'm so guilty of that. So how do we overcome these obstacles?
One thing is to write down the cost. What's the cost of not achieving my dream? And I have this little exercise, Jeanette, where it's kind of fun, it's kind of silly, but it works. But I call it fictitious follower imaginary impact. All it means is that you write yourself a letter about someone who experienced your dream. So for me, it's books. In other words, for the book Unhackable, before I wrote it, I literally wrote a letter that said, Dear Carey, I've never met you, but I read your book and it changed my life. Let me tell you the story. All of a sudden, when you write out a fake letter like that and put it up on your desk, when you sit there and say, well, gee, I want to watch Netflix, or I want to go do this, or I want to do that, suddenly you look at that letter and say, hey, Julie is not going to be able to have a changed life unless I do it. And so everything, like even you might say, I have a desire to clean the garage. Fine, that's a dream. Write it down though. Like maybe it's the kids will be appreciative, or you'll be able to find things and you'll have a less stressed life. But think about the after. You see what I'm saying? Think about the finished dream before you start, and then you can actually partake in some of that joy, and then it pushes you through that messy middle when we often get hacked.
Now, this couldn't possibly be a solo journey, right? So how important is it to have someone alongside you, someone who can mentor you and encourage you?
Yes. Listen, every movie that we love, whether it's Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Hunger Games, whatever, they always have this team. You never find this self-made man, self-made woman. Frodo had Sam. Luke Skywalker had his friends as well. So you just have to realize that it isn't a solo sport. And as you share your vision, other people will want to participate in that.
And on the flip side, of course, how important is it to avoid negative people in your life?
Oh my gosh, negative people, they will keep you down. They will hold you back. There's been a quote by Charles Tremendous Jones that said, you're the average of the 5 people that you hang around. Yeah, if you're hanging around other victims, other complainers, they are going to bring you down because you're an exception. They don't want you around succeeding because you look bad on them. So there's a story about crabs where they literally trap crabs by putting bait in the bottom. The crabs fall in, one starts climbing out, and the other crabs start pulling it back, and literally will kill the crab if it's trying to escape because they don't want to be wrong. Well, in life, when we try to escape our circumstances and create a new future, other people who will pull you down don't want that. And so, yes, you need to be around people who are going to lift you up and raise you up.
Wow. And Carrie, we're almost out of time, but any final thoughts and advice for viewers who have been life hacked and are struggling to get back on track?
Yeah, I'd say take the free assessment. We have an assessment at unhackablebook.com where people can literally look and answer 30 questions, and then out pops this report that says, here's where you're getting hacked. And they can find a lot of clarity and a lot of help over on that website.
Wow, interesting. Well, Carrie, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Carrie Oberbrunner is the author of Unhackable, Close the Gap Between Dreaming and Doing, available at carryoberbrunner.com. Thanks so much for sharing with us today, Carrie.
Thanks for having me.
Canada is a country where Canadians, for the most part, are able to live out whichever faith they practice and feel safe doing so. But imagine living in a country where your faith could cost you everything, including your family, or in some cases, even your own life. Our guest today is Greg Musselman with the Voice of the Martyrs Canada. He joins me today from Edmonton. Greg, welcome back to our program. So good to have you.
Good to be here, and nice to be with you, Jeanette.
All right. Now, Greg, you've traveled all around the world with your ministry, and you've seen all kinds of things and have spoken with all kinds of people, including those who have been persecuted for living out their faith. Now, if we turn our attention to Nigeria for just a moment, the numbers are staggering, aren't they? More than 600 people have been killed this year alone in Nigeria for practicing Christianity.
Yeah, it's a tragic situation, and I've just been interviewing a fellow from Nigeria, one of the leaders there. Yunusa is his name, and he's with a ministry called Christian Solidarity Worldwide Nigeria, and we partner with the Voice of the Martyrs with him. And hearing what's going on currently. I mean, with the Voice of the Martyrs, we have our what's called Persecution and Prayer Alert that comes out every week. And there's always something about Nigeria. We found that it's unbelievable, really. When you hear like large statistics, more than 30,000 killed since 2009, 620 or more that we know of anyway, have been killed already this year. When you start to look at it from the individual families, so a man named Jonathan Yakubu, his wife, and 3 young children were all killed. And then they had a massive funeral. They dig this big hole, and you see all these people, our brothers and sisters in Christ, and it breaks your heart. And, as you mentioned, I've traveled all over the world, but Nigeria is probably the country, when I go there, when I document the stories of persecution and I come back, it's the one that usually hits me the hardest, because talking to people that have had limbs, taken off, there's scars, there's family members have been killed. We're trying to help them, the widows especially, and with the orphans, but it's a situation that is so brutal, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. And, so as I was talking to Yunusa, I said, well, if there's no hope that the government's going to, get in here and at least prevent some of this from happening, what's the hope? And his hope is in Jesus, that this side of eternity, things are pretty terrible, but there's something to look forward to. That's when we die. And that's really has to be presented before the people of Nigeria to make sure that they have their hope in Christ.
What a tragic situation they are facing over there. So, I mean, that just begs the question then, is Christianity growing or shrinking in numbers there with this persecution? Or is it too early to tell right now with all of that?
Yeah. Well, I think, in general, Africa has seen quite an explosion in Christianity. And we take a country like Nigeria, it's the most populous African nation. And the southern part of the country, for the most part, is predominantly Christian. The northern part of Nigeria is predominantly Muslim. And then you've got in the center part called Plateau State, a city called Jos, and many missionaries that came from Canada, America, and other places, that's where they were. It was kind of the launching point to bring Christ into the northern part of Nigeria. But what has happened is the militant Islamists have determined in their mind they are going to turn Nigeria into an Islamic state and under strict Sharia law. And so with that, the Christians that are there, and there's significant numbers of Christians that are in northern Nigeria as well. There's churches there and there's communities like this particular one that I was talking about earlier, Gonan Rogo. It is a place that is a Baptist village, and there's a big Baptist church, and all the people that were recently killed were from that church. So there are areas and pockets where there are Christians. But these Islamists, like the Boko Haram, who are listed as the second most terrorist group in the world, and then the Fulani herdsmen, they're number 4. So you got both these groups working in northern Nigeria. So there's a lot of persecution. Yet, to answer your question, is Christianity growing in Nigeria? Absolutely.
Now, you're saying how dangerous the north was. So there's pockets of the south that are a little bit more safe than in Nigeria?
Yeah, there is. We don't hear a lot of persecution, say in Lagos and some of the larger cities. I mean, there's still things that are going on, and that can be more of a cultural situation. Let's say a family is Muslim, they're living in the south, and family members become Christians. They could be killed, but they're more like being ostracized or losing their jobs, that kind of thing. But definitely there are, people that are coming into relationship with Jesus in the south. But because, again, there's not the persecution. And unfortunately, in the southern part of Nigeria, there's some pretty interesting theologies like the prosperity gospel, that kind of thing that, they're trying to follow the American way. And there's some things about the church that are a little bit odd. I found one of the things that was really interesting in like Plateau State in the center part, that's where we were. And then we were going into the north and doing interviews. And I remember one particular day I had interviewed a number of people. One guy told me the story of how his father and a number of the men in his church were driven by the Islamists into the building, and they killed them all. And he got cut and shot, and he had to pretend he was dead. Bukar Samson is his name, and eventually became the pastor of that church. But I was, he was telling me the story, and I videoed it. In fact, I wrote about him in my book, and I seen the scars, and then talked to others that had been just through this brutality, and we've met dozens of children and orphans as a result of the persecution, especially in the north, that have come to the south. And then I was in this hotel, and I heard the music, and it was worship. And I go, I love African worship. And I'm in there, and then they put on the message, which was on video, and it was a prosperity message about getting a better car and a better life. And I'm going, man, and just down the road, people are dying for Jesus. So they have the same issues and the same challenges, Jeanette, as we do. But yet in the middle of all that, God is working, and some say in spite of persecution, but I think a lot of the time people have to make a decision. Either you're in the kingdom fully, both feet in, or you're not so sure. And of course, God loves us no matter where we're at, but it does cause people to really, consider the cost, which we're all supposed to do when we follow Jesus.
That's fascinating. And of course, speaking of dangerous countries to practice your faith, North Korea and Iran are certainly up there as far as most dangerous places to practice Christianity, right? So how is the underground church doing in North Korea?
Well, that's always a very interesting question, because for many years, our friends at Open Doors, another ministry that works with persecuted Christians, have the World Watch List. And North Korea, year after year after year, more than a decade, have been on the top of that list. Now, Afghanistan is close to that. But in North Korea, because you've got what's called the Juche system, where it's kind of the worship of the Kim family, and it's basically a ripoff of the Bible. And Christianity, of course, exposes the falseness of Juche. So if you're caught with a Bible, you can be put in a concentration camp. You could be killed. And not only you, but your family members. They're so paranoid of Christianity. I mean, interestingly enough, 100 years ago, North Korea was actually stronger than South Korea. Then the war came along, and then there was the split. South Korea now has 4 of the 5 largest churches in the world, and then just across that border, just the demilitarized zone there in between North and South, is you can be killed for having a Bible or for meeting. But the interesting thing is that the church still is growing. It's growing at a faster rate percentage-wise than here in North America. Now, they can't meet publicly. They have their show churches there in Pyongyang, but it's controlled. They can't openly meet. And so they're meeting in their homes, and they have to be very careful even to tell their children if they're Christians, because if their children say something at school, the children come home and mom and dad are gone. They are put in a concentration camp, never to be seen again, or they could even be executed. I mean, that's how serious it is. And yet they're meeting in their homes. And what's kind of an interesting thing is I was talking to Eric Foley, and we work with him. He's with Voice of the Martyrs Korea in Seoul, and I've had opportunity to be there and to meet North Korean Christians who are absolutely amazing people. But I asked him, well, how is the COVID-19 and the shutdown, affecting the North Korean Christians? And he said, well, it's actually, for them, it's been a positive, because they have to work long, long days, have very little time at home to study the Bible, and they have to, again, doing this in secret. But because of the shutdown, they've been put into their homes, and the government officials don't want to go near them. And so they've been able to take time of studying the Bible in worship. And then with Voice of the Martyrs Korea out of Seoul, we broadcast into their, the Bible and, commentaries and encouraging the believers there. And so for them, this time has been actually in some ways positive. Now, when people say, well, how many Christians are in North Korea? And, it's really hard to know the numbers on these things, because what happens is so many of them have been executed, have been imprisoned, but it's still growing. So maybe 100,000 of Christians there, and maybe 30,000 of those would be in concentration camps. But people are coming to know the Lord. And again, getting numbers in such a closed society is very difficult. But I can tell you, the ones that are there are very determined. And when I was talking with Eric the other day, I said, well, how can we pray for Christians in North Korea? What should I tell my Canadian believing friends? And he said, it's interesting that he had asked that question of a North Korean leader many years ago. And this North Korean leader said to him, what, pray for us? We pray for you.
Now, Greg, you'd mentioned the pandemic. So now you also had mentioned to me earlier that you were supposed to travel to Turkey to speak with some Iranian Christians before this whole pandemic arose, right, for COVID-19. So maybe talk really quickly, in the amount of time we have left, about what you were going to do there.
Yeah, we were going to go to Turkey, the southern part, and I was actually going to be doing a trip to Israel with 100 Huntley Street. And that trip got shut down because we had to quarantine for 14 days, and the trip was 10 days. So I'm not a mathematician, but those numbers didn't add up. And then because I was in the neighborhood, I was going to travel with one of our partners that we work with. He's an Iranian, lives in Canada, and to bring aid to Christian refugees from Iran, and they were getting into Turkey. Now, I have been there in the past in Turkey and have met with Iranian Christians who have left the country because of the unemployment and the problems and the oppression and the rest of it. And so they have, got into Turkey. So we were going to go there and bring them food and aid and, and get their stories and find other ways in which we can help them. I know in one case, a family there, 2 of their children both have severe medical issues. And so Voice of the Martyrs Canada has been helping them. And, just to talk to them, to find out what's going on and how we can help them. Of course, everything got shut down. And, of course, we're concerned because the people that we're responsible for, that we feel responsibility for, trying to get the funds there. But I found, Jeanette, is that the Canadian people that support Voice of the Martyrs have not held back their giving. In fact, they're really wanting us to help persecuted Christians, because whether it's, in Turkey or in other places, especially Pakistan, India, Christian refugees from Syria that are in Lebanon. We're hearing so many cases that the Christians are not getting the food and the supplies that other people are because they are not, say, Muslim, they're not Hindu, whatever the majority religion is. And so they're paying a huge price. And we've heard of Christians that in Pakistan, as an example, that are starving to death and are dying because they can't get food. If they would renounce Jesus, they can have food. But many of them would say, I'd rather die than deny Jesus. I mean, and of course others they would say, well, I need food, I need to feed my kids. I'll just say I'm a Muslim, but in my heart I'm for Jesus. So, I mean, God is a God of mercy, but these are, there's some difficult situations. In fact, we're going to have a conference call this week with a number of other leaders, well, actually next week, from around the world, that how the COVID-19 is affecting persecuted Christians and ways that as international groups that work with persecuted Christians to help them get food.
Makes you realize how much we really take our freedoms for granted over here when you look at what the rest of the world is going through, what many people are going through. Greg, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be on the show, and it was nice talking to you today, Jeanette.
Michael ZWAAGSTRA is a public high school teacher and author. He has extensive experience teaching a wide variety of grade levels and currently teaches high school in Manitoba, high school social studies. He has a new book out called The Naked Man Flees, and it's not exactly what you're thinking. Michael joins me now via Skype from Steinbach, Manitoba. Welcome back to BCN, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Hal. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, you've previously written 2 books and articles on education policy. Why now have you decided to write a book about the Bible?
Well, the Bible has obviously been an area of interest of mine for a long time. And while I have written books on education policy, and that's what I'm well known for across the country commenting on, I'm also very passionate about the Bible. I believe that there's a lack of biblical literacy out there, not just among non-Christians, but frankly, even among many Christians, that we get a very superficial understanding where if you're relying just on popularized movies and maybe listening to some sermons and remembering what you learned in Sunday school, you're going to miss a whole lot of valuable information that's in the Bible and things that's worth learning. And so I decided it was time to write a book that pointed out some of these passages that commonly get overlooked and take a look at what they really mean.
Okay, we got to talk about this title, The Naked Man Flees. Makes a few people chuckle here. How did you come up with that name?
Well, the Naked Man Flees is also the title of one of the chapters, and it references a couple of verses in Mark chapter 14, verses 51 and 52. And that's the story of where Jesus has just been arrested by the guards, and he's about to be taken into custody. And it mentions that there was a young man who had been following behind, and the guards seized him, and he ran away, and he left his linen garment behind, and he ran away naked. And it's just this bizarre 2 verses. It appears only in the Gospel of Matthew, nowhere else in the Bible. We never see any direct reference to this man again. And a lot of people just miss that. They just go, well, what's this doing in here? And what I point out in my book is that actually there's a number of things we can learn from it. But one of the key things is, yeah, it's an odd event. It's the type of thing that you wouldn't expect a reference to a naked man running away to make it into a holy, sacred account regarding the arrest of the Son of God. But it is the type of thing you would expect to find in a real historical book describing what actually happened, and that the only reason for Mark to even put this in his gospel is because it happened. It's bizarre, it's strange, and it's yet powerful support for the veracity, for the truthfulness of the reporting that we find in the Gospels.
Michael, why is it that Christians and non-Christians alike tend to overlook certain parts of the Bible when they read it?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but the key thing is that our brains tend to go with what is most familiar. And so we get used to certain patterns, and we tend to look at things based on how we've commonly understood it. And so what that means is that we miss details that don't really fit with what we commonly understand. And the book starts where I show a little triangle, and I ask people, what does it say within it? And most people who read this triangle will think it says Paris in the spring, but it actually doesn't. There's actually an extra word in there, an extra the, that almost everyone misses because you're so used to seeing the phrase Paris in the spring, we miss that it actually says something a little extra. And it's similar when we look at our Bibles that, we know the story of Abraham and Moses and David, and it's so easy to miss the aspects of their character and their personalities that don't fit the popular narrative. And there's a lot of those things like that. And that's why Christians and non-Christians alike tend to miss these things when they're reading their Bibles.
Now let's talk a bit about Abraham. Your first chapter is titled, Abraham Shoos the Vultures Away. What are you discussing specifically in this chapter here?
Well, in Genesis chapter 15, God at one point is telling Abraham that he is going to inherit the land of Canaan. He's going to be the father of a great nation. And what happens is that Abraham then asks God, how can I know that this will be so? And instead of giving a straightforward answer, we see from verses 7 to 11, God telling Abraham to offer a sacrifice. And he has to bring a heifer, a goat, and a few other sacrificial animals. And then he has to cut them in half. And he then lays them on opposite sides from each other, and he walks in between them. And the passage then says in verse 11 that he shooed the vultures away until the evening. He actually kept the vultures from eating the carcasses. And then after that, we see the dialogue resume between God and Abraham. Now, again, because this is a famous chapter dealing with the great promise that God is giving to Abraham, we tend to gloss over this is a whole day that Abraham spent at this sacrifice. He not only had to bring these animals, he had to cut them in half. Think about the amount of gore and blood involved and how difficult it would have been for this old man to do this. And then he's walking in between them, and then he's keeping the vultures away. It's a powerful story of Abraham showing that his faith was real, that this following God's commands was so important that he was going to follow it exactly as God said. And he also knew, I can't just let the vultures come and eat the sacrifice that I've offered up to God. I have to protect them. And so he spent the day doing that. And it shows that that he followed up his faith with good works. Because, of course, as we know as Christians, good works come about as a result of our faith. And Abraham demonstrated it in that section.
Now, another interesting chapter is called God Almost Kills Moses. Tell me more about that one.
Well, in Exodus chapter 4, most people know the story of Moses encountering God at the burning bush and God telling him, you're going to be leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And Moses is then on his way back to Egypt. And then we know that afterwards that Moses meets Pharaoh and makes the demand. But in between, while he's in the wilderness, there are 3 verses 24 to 26, where it says that on his way back, God met Moses and was going to kill him until his wife Zipporah took a flint knife and circumcised Moses' son right then and there. And as a result of that, God did not kill Moses. And we don't see that incident in the movie The 10 Commandments. You don't see it in Prince of Egypt, and you don't hear about it in a lot of sermons. But again, there's a lesson here. Moses didn't do something that was absolutely fundamental. He didn't circumcise his own son. There were a few things that were more disobedient among Jewish people at that time than to not circumcise their own son. And there was no way that Moses could lead the Israelites out of Egypt if that had been left unresolved. And so it's a reminder to us today that if you've been called into ministry, right, or to lead an organization, make sure you've taken care of the fundamentals first before you just go ahead and take that position. If you're going to be the leader of a pro-family lobby group, you better make sure your marriage is in good shape first. Take care of the fundamentals, just like Moses should have.
It's funny, your book almost reminds me of a Cole's Notes version of the Bible. The analysis and getting a little more in depth with it, and then maybe summarize it a little bit more. Now, your book, The Naked Man Flees, Michael, has 40 chapters, half about the Old Testament, the other half about the New Testament. I thought maybe you'd focus a little more on the New Covenant.
Yeah, I did this deliberately. I chose to, and of course, 40 is the number of completion too, so there's that biblical reference. So it's a complete book. But I chose to go half and half because I want to make it clear that the Old Testament and the New Testament are equally important. Christians, it's tempting to skip the Old Testament and just go straight to the New Testament, and I understand why. The New Testament makes things more explicit and direct, but the Old Testament is where you find the foundations. It's the Old Testament that Paul is speaking about in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, when he says that all Scripture is inspired by God. And so you can't really fully understand the New Testament if you don't read the Old Testament. And so I wanted to make sure in this book that I gave equal attention to both the Old and New Testament because they're both important for Christians today.
Now, do you believe that the stories you talk about in your book actually happened, or are they simply symbolic of a deeper spiritual meaning?
I believe the stories actually happened. Throughout the book, I take a high view of Scripture. So I believe that the incidents that have happened in regards to Abraham and Moses and all of the others, I believe they occurred as actually described within the Bible. Obviously, we have to read the Bible according to the genre that the different books are written in. I recognize that. But in the historical narrative where it's describing things that happened, whether it was the miracles that Jesus did or the events described in the Old Testament, I believe the appropriate thing to do as Christians is to take the Bible at its word. And so I do believe the stories happened as described.
So what benefit would Christians really receive from reading your book?
Well, I think Christians would hopefully gain a deeper appreciation for the Bible. And it's really easy sometimes to come to the idea that, I've kind of been there, done that. I'm pretty familiar with the Bible already. And we get bored in our Bible reading, in our devotions. And so this book is intended to shake people up a little bit and to make them notice, whoa, there's some parts of the Bible that I might have missed before. And I wonder how many other parts of the Bible I've been missing. Maybe I need to read the Bible a bit more carefully. Maybe I shouldn't just stick to the well-worn, one verse a day devotional guide, which tends to pick the easy verses with the obvious application. Maybe I should get back to reading the Bible itself and not skip over chapters that I think are difficult. And so I really hope that my book inspires people to take more time reading the Bible itself.
Now, you've also done media interviews about your book on secular radio stations. Why would non-Christians be interested in your book?
Yeah, I have done a number of interviews on some pretty major secular radio stations where the majority audience is non-Christian, and each of the hosts that interviewed me was definitely non-Christian. But I believe that non-Christians should read the Bible too, because obviously as a Christian, I want them to read it because I hope it brings them to faith in Jesus. But even before that, just to have a better understanding of our history and our culture, it makes sense to read the Bible and have some understanding of it. And one of the interviews I did was with a radio host who asked me a series of questions about the book. He had actually started his interview saying, "This is going to be interesting because I'm an atheist, and here I am talking about the Bible." And by the end of the interview, he had said, "You've convinced me. I'm going to get a copy of your book. Maybe I need to, as an atheist, start reading the Bible because there's some stuff in there that I need to become more familiar with." And so, if it could be a witness and to get more people to look at the Bible and not just have it sit on their shelves, then that's what I'm hoping happens.
Hey, did you follow up to see if this person gave their life to Christ?
Well, the interview was only last week, and so I don't think that it's going to happen quite that quickly. But I certainly would hope that does happen, and I do hope to be able to talk to him again. I am on that show on a fairly regular basis talking about education issues, and so I do want to look for opportunities to ask the question.
And you know what? At the end of the day, the seed has been planted, so that's wonderful. Now, some would say, "Hey, Michael ZWAAGSTRA, you're not a pastor. Why should I buy into this?" Do you have any theological training?
You're right. I'm not a pastor, and most of my obviously experience and training in education is in the field of education, including a master's degree in educational administration. But I also have a Master of Arts in Theological Studies from Liberty University, and I completed that degree about 4 years ago. And so I do have some academic training in the area of theology. And obviously, I have my personal reading that I've done over the years and teaching. But I do have a master's degree in theological studies, and on a part-time basis, I do teach at Steinbeck Bible College as an adjunct professor, where I've taught courses on history and theology and ethics, and so I do believe I have some reasonable credentials in this area.
Now, where can people actually pick up a copy of your book, Michael?
Well, the simplest way to get it, because it's just out, would be to go to Amazon. If you go to Amazon.ca and you type in "The Naked Man Flees," it'll pop up pretty quickly. Either that or type in my name and it'll come up pretty quickly there. And I do expect to start getting into some bookstores in the not too distant future. But obviously, right now, with everything being slowed down by COVID, the fastest way at this point, if you want to get a copy of the book, is just go to Amazon and type in the name of the book, The Naked Man Flees, and it'll pop up pretty fast.
Could The Naked Man Flees be used as a private devotional or maybe in a Sunday school class? I bet you kids will probably get a kick out of that title.
Yeah, I believe it could. And the chapters are short. I mean, there's 40 chapters, and each chapter is about 1,200 to 1,500 words, and so it could be used as a devotional. In fact, one of the people I had involved in editing the book turned it into that as he was doing his editing. He said that as he would edit one chapter a day, and he said, I just made it my devotional. And so that's where I sort of thought that, well, I wonder if maybe others could do that too. But it could also be a great book to use in Sunday school, both at the high school level and in an adult class. I think there could be some great discussion from it. I've taught adult Sunday school for many years, and these are the types of topics I can assure you that get people interested in discussions. And Sunday school is a great opportunity to do that. And I think this book could be a good resource for Sunday school classes.
Does your book try to settle long-standing theological scores such as Calvinism, the age of the earth, or infant versus adult baptism?
No, that is not the purpose of the book. I take an approach somewhat similar to C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity approach. I guess in this case, I'd sort of go with mere evangelical Christianity, because it is an explicitly evangelical book. It is in that regard. But I'm very clear in the book that I'm not getting into the mode and the time of baptism as part of the debate, or the proper interpretation of Revelation. Those are important issues, and I think it's worthwhile for Christians to look into them and explore them. And I've got views on all of those, as do most Christians. But that's not the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is to get people into the Bible and to get them thinking for themselves. And I'm not interested in settling theological scores. This is not going to be the book that resolves all those issues.
Teacher and author of the book, The Naked Man Flees, Michael ZWAAGSTRA. Thanks for joining me today from Steinbach, Manitoba.
Well, thanks very much, Hal. It's been a pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.